scientists said, let's separate the lunar module and have it impact the moon just at the right distance away from this, and we'll measure how it vibrates, and that'll tell us what's going on in the center of the moon.
When NASA smashed a rocket into the lunar surface, they unintentionally turned the moon into a giant musical instrument that rang for nearly an hour.
It was just amazing. They had not seen something like that before. They wondered, what the devil is this?
This incredible event happened during the 1969 Apollo 12 mission, and it still confuses people today. You might think a solid rock would stop shaking in seconds, but the moon just kept going.
Once you go down the path of a hollow moon, everything is on the table.
This is a key detail because it fed into rumors that the moon is actually hollow, or even an artificial spaceship.
So if the moon were hollow, what would that mean? Well, obviously it's not a naturally occurring phenomenon, so it's got to be artificial. Somebody put it there, someone built it.
In this story, we are going to look at the science that explains the ringing and the wild theories that say we are being watched from an empty shell in space. Massive crash that startled the world. The seismic sensors recorded vibrations that lasted for nearly an hour. It was so intense and so long that one NASA scientist famously said it felt like someone had struck a bell in a church belfry. The ground was literally humming with energy that would not go away. For 55 minutes, the moon was caught in a state of constant vibration. The news of this event spread quickly, and it was hands down one of the most confusing moments in early space exploration. Nobody expected this to happen, but there it was, in black and white on the data sheets. The moon was acting like a giant gong in the sky. This was not a one-time thing either. Later missions like Apollo 13 through 17 did the same thing with even larger rocket stages.
Commander Charles Conrad Jr. and lunar module pilot Alan Beebe released the Apollo 12 launch vehicle and crash it back to the moon. Upon impact, something very unexpected happened. The moon was said to have seismically reverberated like a bell for more than an hour.
In some of those cases, the moon kept ringing for over 3 hours and 20 minutes. It is not that simple, though, when you try to explain this to a regular person. The moon is supposed to be a solid ball of rock and dust. When you hit a rock with a hammer, it does not ring for an hour. It makes a dull thud. This led to a lot of people being confused about the true nature of the lunar interior. The crazy part is that the moon has a density that is much lower than the density of the Earth. Our planet has a mass of 5.51 grams per cubic centimeter, but the moon only has 3.34. This difference in weight and the way the moon reacted to the crash started a firestorm of speculation. Researchers were trying to figure out if there were massive empty spaces inside, or if the material was just very different from what we have on Earth. Many are not seeing the truth here because they focus only on the sound, but the data showed that the moon has a very rigid and dry crust. Basically, the experiment was meant to act like a geological X-ray. By hitting the surface, scientists could measure how waves moved through the body of the moon. They wanted to know how thick the crust was and if there was a liquid core. But the ringing made everyone stop and think. If the moon was just a regular rock, the energy should have dissipated. Instead, it bounced around like it was trapped in a container. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of the mission. The sheer volume of the signal was so high that it nearly maxed out the equipment. Astronauts on the surface did not feel the shaking themselves, but the machines 74 miles away were screaming. It was the first time we realized that the moon is not just a smaller version of the Earth. It is something completely different. And the data was coming in fast, and it showed that the moon has a very strange structure. It is not just one solid block. It has layers that are very dry and very fractured. This is why the energy can travel so far without stopping. On Earth, we have oceans and groundwater that act like a sponge. The moon has none of that. It is like a giant piece of glass or a dry bone. When you strike it, the vibration just keeps going. And get this, the scientists found that the moon has mascons, which are areas of very high gravity. These mascons are like heavy weights hidden under the surface. They make it very hard for satellites to stay in a stable orbit. It is almost like the moon was designed to be difficult to study. Will the secrets of the lunar crust stay hidden forever, or will we find the truth? Mystery of the giant bell. To understand why the moon rings like a bell, we have to look at how it is built compared to our home. On Earth, we have a lot of water. It is in the oceans, in the soil, and even trapped inside the rocks deep underground. Water acts like a giant sponge for energy. When an earthquake happens, the water and the moisture in the ground soak up the vibrations and stop them from spreading too far. This is why a big quake on Earth might only be felt for a few minutes before the ground settles down. But the moon is bone dry. There is no liquid water to dampen the mood of a moonquake. The rocks are extremely rigid and tightly packed. What most people do not realize is that the moon has been hit by asteroids for billions of years. This has turned the outer crust into a fractured mess of broken stone. This broken stone is very good at letting seismic waves pass through it without losing energy. Basically, when that rocket hit the surface, the waves of energy started bouncing around like a pinball. They would hit one layer of rock and reflect back to another. Because there was no water to stop them, they just kept going back and forth through the entire body of the moon. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of lunar geology. The waves were traveling through a medium that was almost like a perfect resonator. Imagine a tuning fork. If you hit a tuning fork in a vacuum where nothing can touch it, it will vibrate for a long time. The moon is like a giant version of that tuning fork. The seismic waves, which scientists call P waves and S waves, moved at incredible speeds through the mantle. They were able to travel thousands of miles without fading away. So, here is the deal with the interior layers. The moon has a thin crust that is about 28 miles thick. Under that is a massive mantle made of solid rock, and at the very center is a small iron core that is only about 205 miles wide. Because the core is so small and the rest of the moon is so uniform, the energy from an impact can travel in a straight line for a long time. It does not get lost in different layers of lava or water like it does on Earth. The vibrations were so pure that they behaved more like sound waves in a metal pipe than a shock in the dirt. A lot of people are confused about this because they think ringing must mean the inside is empty. But scientists argue that it is actually the extreme solidity and dryness that causes the effect. It is a paradox where being too solid makes you act like you are hollow. And that is putting it lightly because the moon is essentially a giant soundbox. The top layer, called the regolith, is made of fine dust and broken rocks. This layer is very low density, which makes the energy waves scatter at first. But once they hit the solid rock underneath, they speed up and travel through the entire sphere. This is why the moonquakes recorded by the Apollo missions lasted so much longer than any earthquake ever seen. Some shallow moonquakes reached a magnitude of 5.5 on the Richter scale and lasted for over 10 minutes. On Earth, a quake of that size would be over in less than a minute. The moon just does not know how to be quiet. There are still many rumors on the air, but what many can confirm is that the moon's internal heat is also much lower than Earth's. This means the rocks are cold and stiff. Stiff rocks are better at vibrating than hot, soft rocks. It is like the difference between hitting a piece of cold steel and hitting a piece of warm lead. The lead will absorb the blow, but the steel will ring. The moon is that cold steel. Every impact, whether it is a NASA rocket or a stray asteroid, sends a message through the entire body of the moon. This is a key detail for anyone trying to build a base up there. You would have to deal with the fact that a small impact on one side of the moon could be felt as a vibration on the other side. Could these vibrations be a signal from something living deep inside the lunar rock? Alien engineering under craters. There are still many rumors on the air, but what many can confirm is that the ringing moon gave birth to the hollow moon hypothesis. In 1970, two Soviet scientists named Michael Vasin and Alexander Shcherbakov published a famous article in a magazine called Sputnik. They suggested that the moon was not a natural satellite at all. Instead, they proposed that it was an artificial spaceship created by an advanced alien civilization. They pointed to the fact that the moon rings like a bell as evidence that it has a metallic inner hull protected by a thick layer of space dust. Everyone is obsessed with this idea because it explains so many strange things about the moon. For starters, the moon is exactly the right size and at exactly the right distance to perfectly cover the sun during a solar eclipse. The odds of that happening naturally are extremely low. And get this, The crazy part is that some of the rocks brought back by the Apollo astronauts appeared to be older than the Earth itself. There are even reports that some of the surface material contains processed metals, like titanium and zirconium, that do not usually form in large amounts on a natural moon. Conspiracy theorists like David Icke have taken these ideas and run with them. They claim the moon was towed into orbit millions of years ago to stabilize the rotation of the Earth and allow life to grow. See, the idea is that an empty shell would be much easier to move through space than a solid rock. If the moon is hollow, it would explain why it is so light for its size. Its average density is much lower than any of the other rocky planets in our neighborhood. But here is the catch. Scientists say that if the moon were truly hollow, it would not be able to stay in a stable orbit. The gravity of the Earth would eventually pull it apart or crash it into our surface. They argue that the low density is just because the moon does not have a big iron core like we do. However, that does not stop people from wondering if there are giant bases hidden inside. Some people believe that the moon is a giant observation deck or even a prison for ancient entities. They point to the fact that the moon always shows the same face to the Earth. This synchronous rotation is common in space, but for a world that rings like a bell, it feels a bit too perfect. Many are not seeing the truth here because they want to believe in the mystery, but the evidence of the vibrations is hard to ignore. The Soviet scientists also noted that the craters on the moon are all very shallow. Even the widest craters do not seem to go very deep into the surface. They suggested that there is a hard metallic shell under the dust that stops asteroids from going any further. If you hit a metal plate covered in sand, you get a wide, shallow dent. That is exactly what we see on the moon. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of the hollow moon theory. If the moon was just rock, a big asteroid should punch a very deep hole. But on the moon, even the biggest impacts seem to hit a wall. So, here's the deal. If the moon is actually a ship, who built it? Some say it was an ancient race of humans who left Earth before a great disaster. Others say it was an alien race that wanted to monitor our evolution. There are stories from ancient cultures all over the world that talk about a time before the moon was in the sky. These legends say the moon arrived suddenly and changed everything. While modern science ignores these stories, the ringing sound from the NASA experiments keeps the conversation going. It is hard to tell people that the moon is just a boring rock when it acts like a giant piece of technology. Is the moon watching us from a hidden window inside its metallic shell? Wildest lunar conspiracies. When you dive into the deepest corners of the internet, the theories about the ringing moon get even crazier. Some people are not just saying the moon is hollow. They are saying it is a giant machine designed to control human consciousness. One of the wildest ideas is that the moon is a soul catcher. This theory suggests that when people pass away, their energy is pulled toward the moon, where it is wiped clean and sent back to Earth to be reborn. The ringing sound is explained as the hum of the giant machines that process these souls. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but there are thousands of people who believe this is the true reason the moon stays in our orbit. They say the moon is a trap that keeps us from leaving the cycle of life on Earth. But wait, there is more. Another group of theorists believes that the moon is actually a Dyson sphere or a Death Star. They think the interior is not just empty, but filled with entire cities and ecosystems. According to these people, the reptilian race or other alien groups live inside the moon and use it as a base to run the world from behind the scenes. They point to lights and anomalies seen in craters like Aristarchus as proof that there is activity inside. When NASA hit the moon and it rang, these theorists said it was the sound of the alien cities vibrating. They believe NASA knows the truth, and that is why we have not been back in a long time. They claim the astronauts saw structures and were told to keep quiet. The crazy part is that some people think the moon is not even a physical object. They believe it is a giant hologram projected into the sky to hide something else. The ringing data, in their view, is just a glitch in the simulation. They say that if you look at the moon through a high-powered telescope, you can see lunar waves that look like a screen refreshing. This is a key detail for the simulation theory. They think the impact of the rocket caused a resonance in the holographic projection, which we interpreted as a moonquake. It is not that simple, though, because we have brought back physical rocks from the surface, but the theorists say those rocks were just placed there to fool us. And get this, there is a rumor that the moon is actually a prison for a powerful ancient entity. Some legends say that a god or a demon was locked inside the moon a long time ago. The ringing is said to be the sound of that entity trying to break out. Every time we mess with the moon, we risk waking up something that should stay asleep. This ties into the idea that the Apollo missions stopped because they encountered something terrifying. Whether it was aliens or a sleeping god, the story is always the same. The moon is a giant shell hiding a secret that is too big for us to handle. Nobody expected this to happen, but these theories continue to grow every year. People look at the perfect symmetry of the moon and the way it stabilizes our planet, and they just cannot believe it happened by accident. They see the ringing as the smoking gun that proves the moon is an engineered object. Whether it is a spaceship, a prison, or a soul catcher, the moon remains the biggest mystery in our sky. The science says it is a dry rock, but the imagination says it is a gateway to another world. We are left wondering if we are the masters of our own planet, or just subjects of the giant ringing sphere above us. New technology was finally able to peel back the layers and show us what was truly there. Ancient stone and modern dreams. As we look toward the future, the mystery of the ringing moon is far from over. NASA is planning to go back to the surface with the Artemis missions. This time, we are going to stay. We will be setting up bases and laboratories that will use even better seismometers to listen to the heartbeat of the moon. We might find that there are giant lava tubes or caves that are large enough to fit entire cities inside. These are not exactly hollow spaces in the conspiracy sense, but they are empty voids that could be used by humans. Recently, a giant pit was found in the area where the first humans landed. It leads to a cave that could be miles long. This is the kind of stuff that keeps the curiosity alive. See, it is not that simple though, because the more we look, the more questions we find. For starters, we have to talk about why the moon behaves like a giant tuning fork in the first place. When those rocket stages slammed into the dust during the Apollo years, the vibrations did not just fade away. They kept going for over 1 hour. This is a key detail that most people do not realize because it contradicts everything we know about how planets should work. On Earth, a solid rock stops shaking in seconds because of the moisture and the gravity. But on the moon, the silence is replaced by a deep, low hum that vibrates through the entire sphere. And get this. The crazy part is that some people think this ringing is not a natural event at all. One of the most overlooked aspects of this whole story is the theory that the moon is actually an ancient transmitter. If you hit a hollow metal pipe, it rings for a long time. If you hit a solid rock, it does not. A lot of people are confused about why NASA would spend billions of dollars to crash rockets into the surface, unless they were trying to see if there was something mechanical inside. There are still many rumors on the air, but what many can confirm is that the moon is one of the most anomalous objects in our solar system. It is exactly 400 times smaller than the sun and exactly 400 times closer to us. This perfect geometry allows for the total eclipses that we see from our backyard. Some say this is too perfect to be a mistake. They believe the moon was placed here like a giant satellite to watch over the Earth. Basically, the theory is that the moon is an ancient, abandoned observation deck. But here is the catch. If the moon is an artificial ship, who is inside it now? This leads us to the wild world of the soul catcher theory. Some people believe that the moon is not just a rock, but a giant machine that recycles human energy. They say that when the moon rings, it is actually the sound of a massive frequency being broadcast to the Earth. This frequency is supposed to keep us in a state of confusion, so we do not realize our true potential. It sounds like something out of a movie, but there are people who swear that the moon is a giant soul trap. They point to the fact that the moon has a strange effect on our tides and our behavior. We have the word lunatic for a reason. Everyone is obsessed with the idea that the moon is just a pretty light in the sky. But what if it is actually a giant prison or a broadcast station? This is hands down one of the most terrifying ideas, because it would mean we are being monitored every single second of our lives. And that is putting it lightly. Some theorists take it even further and claim the moon is a holographic projection. They say that if you look closely enough during a lunar wave, you can see the image refresh like a computer screen. They think the ringing recorded by NASA was actually a glitch in the simulation. In this version of the story, the moon does not even exist as a physical object. It is just a giant screen in the sky that hides the real truth of what is happening in outer space. If that sounds too wild, just remember that the moon is the only satellite in the solar system that does not have a natural orbit that makes sense. It is too big and too close to be a captured asteroid. Nobody expected this to happen when the moon was formed, but yet it stays perfectly in place. What most people do not realize is that the data from the Grail and Lunar Prospector missions has given us a very clear map of the interior. We know exactly where the heavy spots are, and we know how deep the crust goes. But even with all this math, the feeling of the ringing moon never goes away. It is a poetic anomaly. It shows that even in a cold and dark universe, there is beauty in the way things work. We are going to find out more in the next few years than we have in the last 50. The moon is our stepping stone to the rest of the solar system. If we can solve its mysteries, we can solve anything. The truth is out there, but it might be more natural than we ever imagined. Still, we have to wonder about the deep chambers that have never seen the light of the sun. There are massive craters that stay in total darkness for billions of years. Some scientists think there is frozen water in those pits, but the wilder theories suggest they are entrances to an underground world. One of the most interesting rumors is that there are giant towers on the backside of the moon that we never see from Earth. These towers are said to be miles high and made of a material that does not reflect light. If the moon is a ship, these could be the antennas used to communicate with a distant galaxy. This is a key detail because if we find even one structure that is not natural, it changes the entire history of the human race. It would mean that we are not the first ones to explore the stars. It would mean that our moon is a used car that was parked in our orbit a long time ago. A lot of people are confused about why we stopped going to the moon after the 17 mission. They think we were told to stay away by whoever is living inside. They say the ringing was a warning to stop knocking on the door. Is the moon a natural shield for our planet, or a mysterious relic with secrets still hidden inside? What do you think about the ringing data? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know your theory. If you loved this deep dive, like and subscribe for more mysteries.